Welcome to Frank Wealth Insights, a financial and investment podcast from Return on Life Wealth Partners. They look at your money. We look at your life at returnonlifewealth.com.
Welcome to the latest episode of Frank Wealth Insights podcast. I'm your host, Frank Fantozzi, president of Return on Life Wealth Partners, celebrating our 30th anniversary by helping business owners and families achieve a life well lived. Joining me today is one of our firm's outstanding wealth advisor, Chelsea Hussey. On today's episode, we will be discussing how to raise kids with money awareness without just giving them the money. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thanks, Frank.
So, Chelsea, in your opinion, what does it mean to raise kids with money awareness, and why do you feel it's important to instill financial literacy in children from a younger age?
I think the key word here is precisely what you said, is awareness. It's realizing that things cost money or require resources, which means that the choices you make are important. It doesn't have to be prohibitive or it shouldn't be at the forefront of every conversation we have to the point where it worries them. But understanding that we have this limited resource here, it gives them a sense of responsibility. It really parallels well, I think, with teaching kids about time. As an example, for my daughter, if she takes way too long at the dinner table to finish her dinner, she's not going to have enough time for dessert before bed. It's about making choices. If we take our time here, we lose a little bit of time later on.
Oh, you mean you don't have a family money tree in the backyard and you can pick dollar bills down anytime you want?
Nope. It might feel that way for many kids. I mean, we live in an instant gratification sort of world where if we don't like the song, we skip ahead instantly. If we need something from the store or groceries, we can order it, we can DoorDash it. Everything happens pretty fast.
Well, curious, Chelsea, when you were growing up, what are some of the things you can recall that either your parents taught you or that you experienced on your own in regards to developing a relationship with money? Because I always feel that relationship that you develop as a youth carries on to, being adult, those memories, good or bad, with money.
So growing up for us, we were a family who didn't really talk about money that much. My sister and I, we got a sense of how our lifestyle fluctuated, whether it was a rags or riches kind of moment or whether we were flush with cash, but it really wasn't a conversation we had, which I think is part of why I'm so passionate about financial literacy and awareness for kids. For my dad, when he passed away, he didn't have a long-standing relationship with an advisor. We were sort of cobbling together bits and pieces of what he had in place. And I couldn't help but think at the time, if he had an advisor he had that trusted relationship with, what a difference that might have made for my sister and I, who were only 18 and 19 at the time, if we had some professional or somebody there who could help teach us this. And that's part of why I got into this business, because I wanted to learn for myself so that I could become more empowered, because that's really what it is. Knowledge is power. So the more you know about financial planning or financial literacy, the more empowered you are.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice, and a great frame of reference to create context for our listeners. I know for myself, my early recollection of dealing with money, because I was never given an allowance. So a little backstory, my parents immigrated here in the late 50s. Basically, their families wanted to have a better life by having more financial opportunity. So frugality was one of the things I remember growing up. My parents very much instilled and tried to teach me the difference between what you need and what you want. You need to have milk and basic groceries versus, the ho-hos. As a kid, wanting the ho-hos there, besides the health reasons, were not necessarily a necessity. But my earliest experiences really, because I wasn't really given an allowance. My mom and dad provided what I have, and I think it was their sense of controlling the situation, because they had limited resources, they had limited education, and so money, as you mentioned earlier, was a very limited resource, and how they prioritize that. So for me to be able to go to the candy store and buy something, I had to find creative ways to earn money. So my earliest recollection was my neighbor told me, hey, if you bring in my garbage cans every week, I'll give you 50 cents. I used to go around the neighborhoods collecting, back in the day when you used to be able to get deposit money for bringing in glass bottles for your Pepsi or ginger ale or Coke or anything that you would have. The grocery store would give you nickels and dimes for the deposits, or I'd collect paper for recycling. So those were my earlier days, and that money was a little bit of extra money I had to buy what, a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old would have. As I got older and we moved into a new neighborhood, on snow days, I wasn't home having fun. I was out there at the crack of dawn shoveling driveways to make extra money. And I recall it was like $15, depending on how deep the snow was, if I was doing the sidewalk or the front entrance. And then I really officially started making money when I had a paper route. When I was 13, I started working for my uncle doing landscaping work over the summer. That was my first introduction to taxes, which we'll talk about that, because I got my first paycheck and I thought, wow, I should get my hourly rate times the amount of hours. I go, I'm missing some money here, Uncle. And he says, well, you'll learn about taxes as you get older. So I was very entrepreneurial in trying to raise money because I was never given extra money. I had my household chores to do, but those were expected. I wasn't awarded anything for doing that. So those are some of my earlier, recollections of trying to raise money, have some extra money so that I could buy clothes that my parents wouldn't buy me and things like that.
That's a great tie to operating with that limited resource. For many kids, that really can inspire a lot of creativity. It's thinking, well, I would like a little bit more of this resource. What can I do to solve this problem?
Right.
It's excellent.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it too, and one of the things I've seen, and I'm part of the problem. My parents came here for a better life. They wanted me to have things they didn't have growing up. And the same thing, I'm trying to do things for my daughters. Now, my daughters are a little older. Mine's 25 and 29, and you would think they're totally independent. I don't know if they're ever totally independent financially, but every generation's trying to do more. But that I think, though, as parents, we've realized, are we enabling our children and not really, in this day and age, putting some sense of requirement about money is not an entitlement. It's something that is given. There's consequences. As you mentioned earlier, there's limited resources. So how can we, as we advise our clients with their children, help them instill values about money? And a lot of those values tie to each family, because every family has different values. But what are some of the tools and maybe some of the ideas we can share in today's podcast that help parents in raising, as you mentioned, financial literacy, responsibility, so that when they become adults, they're not always running back to mom and dad as boomerangs and saying, hey, mom and dad, I need money. You gave me money my whole life. And you're trying to figure out how to create that separation without a lot of separation anxiety, but also to enable them to make good decisions, because at some point they have to leave the nest. They have to figure out how to make good decisions. And if they don't learn how to create good savings muscles, I call them saving muscles, and prioritization in regards to wants and needs, they can probably never earn enough money to satisfy all the things they want to do. So I think, part of the goal as we move forward in the podcast is maybe to arm our parents with some ideas. So what would you like to start with, Chelsea? What ideas would you want to start sharing with our parents in regards to helping them? And I know it matters a little bit based on if you're dealing with a 5 to 8-year-old versus someone who's 14, 15, 16.
Sure. I think starting at a young age, it can be as simple as allowing money to come into the conversation. Telling your kids, we're going to do a staycation this year because we're going to be making some home improvements. And could we afford to do both? Sure, but we're making these choices this year that we're going to prioritize a couple things around the house, because the main goal is for us to spend time together as a family. It might be bringing them into research you're doing. I'm looking to get a swing set for my kids. I tend to be a bit of a nerd with the research. I like looking at my options and deciding what's best. And I thought, let me bring my 8-year-old into this and tell her what I'm looking at and what my considerations are, letting them see some of the thoughtfulness. I do think key to this, though, is that as a married couple, that you have some understanding of what your family money philosophy is. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be completely aligned. Often the married couples I'm working with, there tends to be someone who might be a little bit more of a saver, someone who might be a little bit more of a spender, or maybe one of them is household CFO, and the other one is more, let's keep money under the mattress. There's all these different philosophies, and I think having a conversation with an advisor or even an objective third party can help tease that out and help them understand what are our goals that we're aiming toward. Because the better that you understand that and can articulate it for your family, the better you can pass that along to your children.
Well, I definitely agree with that, because good children know how to play off one parent off the other parent. It's like good parent, bad parent.
Yeah.
And so having that united philosophy in regards to how money is important, because one parent might say, no, you're not going to have this, and then they run to the other parent and says, oh, mom or dad, can I have this? And and you're not even knowing this other conversation went on, and then you provide them with the money to buy something, and then your spouse comes to you, I just said no to little Stevie, why are you enabling him by giving him this money? You just totally undermined me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having that united front is very important. One of the tried and true methods I've seen successful, especially with children start to get around 5 years old, and they start to understand that to acquire things or to have things requires money, and they're asking for things a lot, and we have a tough time saying no. So I always been a big fan of tying allowances to chores. First of all, it helps, especially when you have a lot of times two working parents. If your child can be a little bit more neater and more responsible, it makes the parents' lives easier. So setting up a weekly chore calendar and then tying a financial value to that allows that child to know, listen, I have accountability, I have responsibility, and if I do it, I receive this money. Now, I also like, at that age, kids are very visual, and so I like to use like a savings jar where the money goes into the savings jar, and then they can see it accumulate over the time. And then after a certain point, and depending on the goals of the parent, they've accumulated this money, and I'm just using this as an example, you could say 1/3 of it you have to save, 1/3 of it you can spend on yourself because you get some reward. It's kind of like you saving retirement. If all you did was save for retirement and then spend any money on yourself, you kind of lose interest in saving for retirement. I got to live. And the other third, potentially, especially if you're trying to teach your child about charitable giving, or whether you tie it to a church, you could have some of the money go to a charity and start to instill in them the thought of giving back. So I'm a big fan of the allowance for chores. And if you want to up the ante a little bit, and maybe when the child's a little older, as parents, we definitely know the pain of paying Uncle Sam every April 15th, or when you're getting your check every week. So I've seen some parents, maybe at the end of that year, around April 15th, hey, you've saved this much money, we have to take 5 or 10% out to go to Uncle Sam. And right now Uncle Sam is the household, and they're supporting that. Now, a lot of parents just take that money and put it back into the account. But it's a way of starting to teach the children that eventually when they have to get a real job, that they will have to pay Uncle Sam along the way. And Uncle Sam is a big drag in our ability to accumulate wealth.
Absolutely. There's a couple great books out there that will discuss how you can save your money, you can spend your money, you can donate your money, you can invest your money. I think leading into the charitable giving or giving back to others, as kids really start to wrap their minds around the fact that this is a limited resource, it starts getting them thinking also about people who might not have enough. And
right.
Well, if I have a surplus of this, there's things I can do with this.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and another, I think, good idea to teach children, especially at the younger age, 5 to 10 years old, if they go shopping with you, I think it's important to understand why you as a parent make certain choices. Why don't you always buy this name brand versus this other name brand, or why do you buy something on sale? So teaching them to look that, there's value in what you spend your money on at the grocery store or any financial purchase. Those are good life lessons that children will be able to use when they become young adults as well as adults. But I wanted to ask you, Chelsea, what are your thoughts when children get a little older, maybe to an age where the son or daughter can do some babysitting, or maybe getting a part-time job, maybe talking to them about investments, or opening up a bank account? What are your thoughts about that when the child maybe gets a little older and they're starting to get past 10, 11, and they're going into that pre-teen to teen years? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's a very important conversation to have, because over time, what's important for them to learn is really two things can make money. You can make money, and your money can make money. And if we have, as Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest, it can really go to work for you and make money for you without you having to do some of that extra work. And I think as kids get older, their goals get a little bit bigger. Maybe they start thinking about, I'd like to have a car someday, or I'd like some more independence. And the stronger that goal is, the greater the drive there will be to save for it. And I think that's why it's important that, recently the state of Ohio came out with new legislation that financial literacy, I think beginning within the next year or so, is going to be taught in every high school. And I think that's incredibly important because as kids start to really earn some meaningful money outside of their household, it's important for them to know how to save it and make decisions about how to invest it and where to invest it.
Yeah, so involving them, and those are great. First of all, I think the state of Ohio doing that is important. I mean, you have to learn all this great knowledge getting out of high school, but when you don't have, financial literacy, that's a problem. I wish they almost would require home ec be taught again, because I think kids come out of their high school and they don't know how to cook and clean and do just basic things that they take for granted has to happen in a household. It's amazing when my daughter's friends, when they were younger, they come over, and my daughter was actually dating a guy, and he didn't even know how to use a power washer. And I was sitting there going, wow, I'm like, at what point do you learn how to do these basic things to take care of your own house? Because you can't afford to hire everybody for everything you do at your house. You're going to have to do something for yourself. But that's a whole other story on that part. But so what are your thoughts about opening up a bank account? Like I know with some of the parents, they have this jar that they're raising money for the child, but then they take that money and put it into a bank account, and the children get gifts of money for their birthdays and Christmas. What are your thoughts about opening up a bank account and showing them that whole process of managing at least a bank account until they get older to maybe open up a basic investment account?
I think that's a great idea. I know there are some apps. I know Chase has one. I think it might be called Greenlight, but banks are encouraging that and have some of these programs in place. I think it's important because kids are so visual and so and can even be tactical in how they learn, that although we rarely walk into banks anymore, but bringing your child to the bank with the occasion of opening up that bank account. And as kids get older, I mean, they're totally savvy online where they can be tracking how that's growing over time. There's metrics on some of these apps or these accounts where you can set goals. And so watching that balance and being able to check it frequently and see how it's growing over time or how it can be used, it's going to continue to reinforce, again, that thoughtfulness and that drive to make it grow for them.
Oh yeah, I mean, being able to teach a child what the difference is between a debit and a credit on your bank account, as you mentioned, how interest gets earned on the account, and then when they accumulate enough money, maybe opening up a basic investment account, even if it's a single mutual fund, to start to experience the exhilaration and joy of your account growing when the market's doing well as learning the patience of staying invested when the market isn't as agreeable and the market value drops, and they go, Mom and Dad, why did my account drop in value? And then you can explain to them how the investment basics work, so that when they again graduate and start earning more substantial money, they're more mentally prepared to understand how the stock market might impact them.
Absolutely. And as they get older, they begin to become consumers in the general world. They may have different companies or organizations that they start to research or study, and they might get curious about. And then the next step from there is, well, have you considered purchasing that company's stock? And now it can be, again, a part of their study and their research and attach more of their goals and some meaning to it. Something that they're passionate about, purchasing that company's stock will certainly get them, again, in that rhythm of investing and paying attention. Maybe enough attention where they get a little bit bummed when the market goes down, but instilling that awareness.
Awesome stuff. I'm a big fan of having children at the right age. There's still children, preteens and teens, doing some work, getting a part-time job. A couple things I feel it teaches them, one, how, time is a precious resource. It's a level playing field for everybody. We only have 24 hours. And so, when you have a little bit of pressure of having to have a part-time job, it teaches you how to plan your other time better. It also teaches you responsibility because you're working for someone other than your parents being in the home. So now you have to take orders from a store manager or the owner of the deli, and you're doing work. It also teaches you skills on how to work, I think, with your team members that are part of the job, as well as the customers if you're dealing with that. And then there's financial remuneration that comes from working part-time. And I do believe that it's a good way of, one, learning about money, but also it teaches a child how to prepare themselves for work. It's amazing. I've interviewed students coming out of college and they've never held a part-time job. The first time is really maybe doing an internship in college, and they really don't have a lot of maturity when it comes to, how do you approach work? I mean, you might be smart as all can be, but there is a nuance into how do you work in an environment with adults, and all of a sudden the age band changes. You're not around people that are all 22 years old. You're dealing with people that are 25 to 65 years old, and how do you manage that? So I think the part-time job, and again, it's not for everyone, and sometimes we have our kids overcommitted with activities and sports that you can't fit a part-time job in. But I think there's a lot to be learned from one, earning money with your sweat equity and learning the responsibilities of how to deal with that money, as well as working that into, if you think about the microcosm that you created, your school is kind of like your family. And if we all end up having with families, you got to balance managing your family with work. So one of the things I think a part-time job does is teach that level of responsibility.
Now, what are your thoughts on the balance between giving to your kids but giving them still that drive to grow on a sort of parent 401k match, so to speak? So as kids save, the parents are matching that.
Sure, I think it's great. I think it teaches them there's a reward system, a meritocracy for doing what you say you're going to do. So, for example, going back to the chores analogy, if the children for a whole month get all their chores 100% right on time, you might give them, say their allowance, just for simplicity's sake here, $50 for the month. You might, bonus them an extra 15% on top of the $50 because, listen, you got all your chores done 100% on time, I'm going to give you a bonus. And it translates into that match that you talked about in the 401k plan. But I also think it teaches that responsibility of accountability, that you do what you say you're going to do and you do it right. That translates very well into the workplace. You're really teaching subliminally life skills that in a workplace, it's a meritocracy. You get rewarded for how well you do at the workplace. Not everyone's treated equal. Your supervisor or the boss is going to look at it and say, what are you doing that's so much more exceptional than someone else? And that's why you get the bonus and someone else didn't. That's
a great way to approach it. It's a good balance.
The other thing I think we could talk about a little bit is parents don't want their children to know too much. I think part of it is a fear of, well, wait, if they know I make this amount of money, there's an expectation that, well, mom and dad, you should do more for me. Or, maybe parents are not as excited about telling them because, well, why aren't you making as much money as you could be? My friend's dad does this, or my mom's friend does that. I think you got to let that kind of go by the wayside. You are a family unit, and I think involving them as to how the family goes about budgeting, why you are making certain financial decisions, why you chose to buy this kind of car versus this kind of car, those are all things that are important. And it goes back to something we talked about earlier, really having a discussion about wants and needs. I think, I didn't grow up with the internet. My world was really my immediate family and the kids I hung around at school. And pretty much everyone was kind of the same ecosystem. And so you did not know if you were really, it didn't even almost matter as a kid. You didn't know if you were really wealthy or not. You had what you had, right? And I never went without. I always had clothes to go to school. I had lunch, I had dinner. All my basic needs were really being met. I think what has changed is the internet has created this keeping up with the Jones syndrome, where you're saying things on TikTok, you're seeing things on Instagram, and all of a sudden there's this peer pressure, I think, that comes from the internet that says, hey, I need to have this, I want to have this. And it's okay to aspire to have more. There's nothing wrong with trying to do more. Every client I've had who has raised their financial wherewithal by being successful in their career, their lifestyle has correspondingly increased. Maybe not as much as some versus others, but people don't live in the same little house they started with when they got married. They grew a family, they decided to have a nicer home, a bigger home, they decided to have nicer cars. I think that's natural and there's nothing wrong with it. But as a parent, and I'm going to ask your thought on this, Chelsea, but I see that as a challenge for parents that their kids now see all this exposure, not only what happens in the United States, worldwide, and they say, why can't I have that or be like that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think teaching children discernment, especially as they grow, and understanding real versus fake. The cheeseburger you see in the McDonald's advertisement is not what you end up getting at the restaurant. And I think as we live in a world where AI is going to become more prevalent, it's really important to help kids distinguish between, I mean, even for young women, it's understanding, that woman might look perfect, but there's a bunch of Photoshop there. Or if you're looking at some of these reality TV stars, I learned recently that I guess most of the cast of Real Housewives these days, they rent their house for filming, or they're paid by sponsors to wear certain designer clothes and things like that, but they don't own any of that. And so it's giving this inflated sense of a lifestyle that doesn't actually exist. And so I think it's very important, again, as a family, to determine what you value and what's really important in terms of lifestyle and work-life balance and everything else, and really articulating those goals. I mean, even and as you can attest, when we talk to our clients, you and I could each sit down with a different couple and talk about what their ideal retirement looks like, and they might look the exact same on paper but have completely different ideas.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, of what retirement really means to them. So being able to articulate those goals and what they are, and allowing yourself to use your own measuring stick as far as how you're going with your goals. It's so hard, it sounds simple to say, but it can be so difficult to teach with social media. But I think that power of discernment is very important in distinguishing between what's real and what might look real just for the purposes of Instagram.
Yeah, Chelsea, that's great advice. I mean, every family has to find their center. They have to be grounded in their own reality. We should always aspire to improve our lives. And now I'm not just talking financially, just to grow as human beings, but you also have to understand what you can and can't do and be realistic about what your values are and what values you want to instill on the children. Because if parents don't have good financial literacy for themselves, if they don't budget and save and set goals, how do they expect to be able to teach the children? Now, clients that work with financial advisors like ourselves, we help them develop those sense of financial responsibility muscles and building saving muscles. It doesn't come natural. I mean, it's like we all know to eat right and to exercise is healthy, but it's hard to do to make that part of your normal daily activity. Some people do it flawlessly, but for many, it requires effort, even for myself. So it's the same thing with these savings muscles and financial responsibility muscles. So I think it's great advice that parents have to look themselves in the mirror first and say, hey, what am I doing to be responsible and save and set goals and do budgeting? And then how do I help my children develop this at an earlier age so it becomes easier for them when they get into their 20s and 30s. So when they leave the nest, they're making good decisions. They're not being taken advantage of. Teaching them the difference between having a want, and it's nothing wrong with having a want, but understanding, making sure your needs are taken care of, not only today, but if you're not responsible, how are you going to meet those needs in the future? So we're closing in on our time here. Is there anything else you want to share, Chelsea? Maybe a little tidbit or experience in working with parents or helping them with their children on financial literacy?
I think knowledge is power. And when you're empowered, you can make better decisions, and you can prevent yourself from being taken advantage of or from stumbling into a financial mistake. Mistakes can be great and we can learn from them, but being informed is the most important thing you can do. And I think that's why partnering with an advisor is so crucial. Having that second set of ears on your financial situation. As your children grow up, they may end up with a different value or philosophy of money than you do. But the most important thing is to have something defined so that you can articulate it, your children understand it, and then as they grow, they can begin to make informed decisions of what they want their lives to look like and get that return on life that they're looking for and defining what that really means.
Awesome way to end our podcast today. Before we sign off, I'd like to invite anyone who would like to learn a little bit more about some of the games and apps and books that we recommend to our clients. If you go onto our website, returnonlifewealth.com, and contact us, put a note that you were an attendee at our podcast, please let us know what you think, because we're always looking for feedback. We're trying to figure out how to continually provide the right content in the manner that people like to receive it. But if you want us to send you a list of apps and tools and books and games for that age 5 to age 18, let us know and we'll email you the list. If you have any questions, reach out to us. You can also call us at 877-514-9991. I thought it was a great show. I want to thank Chelsea for being on the show with me. She had a lot of great color and content with her experience, and she's an outstanding member on our Return on Life Wealth team. I want to thank everyone for listening to our podcast. If you do like it, please let others know. Remember to like what we're doing, and feel free to subscribe to our Frank Wealth Insights podcast when you get a chance. Take care, have a great day, and enjoy a life well lived. Thank you.
This has been Frank Wealth Insights, the financial and investment podcast from Return on Life Wealth Partners. Your life, your money, your way. Experience financial planning the way it should be, not the way they want it. See how at returnonlifewealth.com. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. This communication expresses the views and opinions of the participants as of the date it was recorded or indicated, and such views are subject to change without notice. This podcast is being made available for educational purposes only and should not be confused for any other purpose. The information contained herein does not constitute and should not be construed as an offering of advisory services or an offer to sell or solicitation to buy any securities or related financial instruments in any jurisdiction. This podcast may discuss forward-looking statements that are based on then-current beliefs of the participants. Investment advice offered through Planned Financial Services, a registered investment advisor.